I am on air with Miss Shannyn Stokes, but we're going to be talking about a couple things. But I always like to tell people when you come on Bridges Live, it is about information, understanding, and action. Understand those things you're listening to, be informed, and hopefully that puts you into an action because without action, we become still. Miss Shannyn, please introduce yourself to everyone on Bridges Live, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shannyn Stokes, and I am a licensed addictions counselor.
So, with that being said, mom, kids, grandkids, like me, I have 7 grandchildren, two more on the way. So, how is that? Does all that part of your life affect you how you work with people, and how your life is going, or is it separate? How do you do it?
Well, as a licensed addictions counselor, being trained as an addictions counselor, when you're working with people and you're identifying some of their triggers, some of the underlying things that drive them to addiction, you also are trying to identify those things within your family.
Yeah,
It's an ongoing thing, right? You don't turn it off. It's very difficult to turn it off. And the reason for that is because you care.
right.
You want to get ahead of it.
I with mental health or anyone who's asking for help, and I hope everyone's asking for help because with addiction, people don't know that they are addicted until things are so sideways or so rock bottom.
Right.
If you could talk to the pre addiction to as say before I get here, what do I need to see? What are the signs that's like this is the path you're heading down, and you should probably get some help before you hit the end of the road. Are there some like pre-red flags you want to throw up for a person who wants to create awareness within themselves?
Right. So one of the things we talk about in my group sessions is that you don't wake up one day and say, I want to be addicted to drugs.
Right,
You don't
right.
do that. And so one of the factors that we consider in addiction is, childhood trauma. If you've
Mhm.
experienced any of that, definitely you want to get some counseling for that because a lot of times that will lead to substances to fill the void that you're feeling because you've experienced some type of trauma. PTSD, anxiety, depression, and environmental factors like your culture, your family culture, your community, and how you deal with stress and how you deal with anxiety and all those things. There's so many contributing factors. And another thing that you want to consider is that are you putting substances ahead of your family, ahead of your responsibilities? Like, for example, I would like to go home and spend time with my family, but let me stop by this bar for a few minutes, right? Are you getting to the point where
Right.
you're putting substances before your responsibilities? That is definitely a red flag.
For some, it might seem very small at one point. Like they may not actually say, I'm stopping here before I go home. They just say, they probably don't even say I'm stopping. They probably just stop and they're like, oh yeah, and I'll get out and next you know it's 5 hours later and they haven't been home and I mean it could be as subtle as that. Like I'm just hanging out with my friends, and before they're like, where are you? I'll be there in a few. So it, I think it's the subtlety that catches them.
Absolutely, because you initially you do say, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go and hang out with my friends after work. I'm gonna
Right,
go
right.
meet some people to decompress my day or
Yeah.
whatever." But if you find yourself making excuses why you want to drink, then you want to
Mm.
take a step back and really evaluate what that is. I always tell my clients that we want to identify our attachments to things, right?
Mm.
The environments that you find yourself in, the people that you decide that you want to spend the most of your time with. What are you doing during those times? Is it consuming substances, not just alcohol, but whatever type of drug? Are you taking pills every night before you go to bed that are not prescribed by a doctor, right? So we want to identify our attachments to people, places, and things. I always call them the nouns. What are your emotional attachments to things, right? And are
Yeah.
those things triggers?
I with some of if you people can see the thing of the motion, I teach actually the science of how it affects your body in a chemical level. So what your thoughts are, how it triggers the different dopamine, serotonin, the different chemicals that accesses your neurotransmitters, and what you call for you, it's a pleasure center of the brain, where how that's getting heightened just because of certain things you do. Then that turns into the other stuff, the addiction, and then the stuff that goes, whoa, we're out of control. With myself, I had, healing through my own PTSD and my own sexual abuse that have happened when I was a young kid, and how it would try to reoccur in my life mentally, that fear, that holding back. I had to recognize that, but it was it's so much work to do it on a daily basis, and people don't understand that they have to put in the work, but they first have to get trained. They have to get trained by you, trained by somebody, to say, then they have to put in the work, and I think the training scares them.
Yeah, because the training scares them because it's an identity thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
have you identified with up until this point? And a lot of times when you're trying to address people's addictions, then it really attacks their core belief system. What do I believe about me? What do I believe about my lifestyle and how I've grown up? So it's retraining the brain. And
Hmm.
that's a difficult thing to confront when you've been operating in that way most of your life, because now you're in an identity crisis. You really don't know who you are. We're trying to say, hey, addiction is not your identity. Behavior is not your identity. It's your thought process that's driving maladaptive behavior, driving your addiction, your emotional attachments that's feeding this behavior. It's not your identity. And retraining my clients to say, hey, I am valuable. I am worth living a healthy lifestyle mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
With the Black community specifically, addiction's been addictions attacks us all equally. It does not have a color barrier in it or a religious barrier. But I just know with the Black community, they have a hard time accepting that they're addicted, and getting help. I know that's been my drumbeat since this pandemic, is that I want the Black community to say, let me just go get checked out. Let me go get some help. And let the therapist say, no, you're good. With addictions, I think it's the same thing. Get checked out. For the counselor be like, no, I don't know why you're here. You're good, but if you don't get checked out, you might be where you don't think you are.
Yeah, in the Black community, we are trying to dispel so many stigmas. We
Yes.
have so
Yeah.
many labels. We're always on this upward climb, right? And so that's one more thing. We're going to the counselor to get help for mental illness, even physical exams, we don't necessarily do that.
Right.
So it's another thing to say, hey, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me as a Black person. It feels like another label.
And I don't want people to think there's nothing. If we could get them to stop thinking there's something wrong with you, you're not. There's nothing wrong with you.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what I try to share with my clients, that there's nothing wrong with you. You know, this is just something that you are confronting. This is something that you're dealing with. This is a chemical dependency that you
Right.
can't fight on your own. You need assistance. And sometimes our pride gets in the way of that, because we're like, we can do this on our own. A lot of my clients say, hey, I thought I had this. I thought I could do it on my own. I didn't see it as a problem until I lost everything. Right?
Pride and ego has killed, broken up more marriages, has put people more out of their homes, away from their children, than anything ever. Pride and ego.
Absolutely. But I think that it takes the leaders and those people with the information to reach out to our community and start in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
Start teaching them about emotional health.
Yes.
Start teaching them about the effects of substances or maladaptive behaviors that can lead to substances. Start teaching them at a young age, so when they become an adult, that they won't see it as a stigma or a label or something that's saying, hey, I'm not okay, to go get help from a professional.
9 children, 7 grandchildren, living this life, right?
Hmm.
Cousins, brother, sister, relatives. And I tell you what, you said it in the early part of the show about family. I look around at my family and I'm thinking, I've been doing this for a long time, and you guys are some sick people. And no one's ever talked to me. What the hell? I know we're at a barbecue, but somebody you need to put it down.
Yes.
And you scratch
Yes.
your head. You like, I literally got into this because of what I know I had to overcome.
Yes.
Hey, I'm looking at my cousin. I'm holding him. I love you. You need to talk to me.
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle, right?
Oh,
It's a vicious cycle. And again, it's one of those things to where, can I look in the mirror and know who I really am? It's an
yeah.
identity crisis a lot of times in our community, right?
It's
And
true.
so to change your thinking and to change your behavior, that takes the work, like you just said. Can I put in the work? How do I put in the work? How's this going to affect my relationships with my other cousins, with my bros, with my
Right.
sisters? You know what I'm saying? If I put this behavior down, who's going to be with me? Because then you have to detach from certain environments, from certain people to get healthy. You have to eliminate toxic behavior, toxic relationships, toxic environments. You have to change your whole lifestyle to become healthy. How do you do that? With the emotional attachment that you have to family members, to places, to things, how do you do that? And
And
that's
I,
where you need support.
and I think, like you said, if we start teaching this at a young age, that you can go to the family barbecue, you can hang out with uncles and brothers without turning up or turning it out all completely, knuckleheadish. And it's such a sick behavior. But we see it in our own immediate family, and then we wonder why we still see it in our community, and
Yes.
then we wonder why we don't get into that elevated of not social norm. I'm not talking about society and what they put on us and put all these labels, but how do we get to that next level of ourselves of acceptance when we're still broken in our own immediate? That that bothers me. When we see something on the news, we're like, oh, there they go again, or here it is again. But I look into my own immediate family and they're still doing broken things.
Right. You got to be willing to have the conversation within
Yes.
the family, right? You got to be willing to have the conversation. You have to be willing to deal with the consequences of that conversation, that some people may accept what you say and some may reject it. But you got to be willing to have the conversation with family members in spite of how they may react to you.
I hope when people hear this, see this, or whatever they do with this show, they think, could I have the conversation? Would I have the conversation? Or did I really have a real conversation? Ask those three things. And I want to see what your personal answers are to yourself. And then if you could have a conversation, is there one person, whether it be a child, or whoever, someone you're close to, it could be a fraternity, it could be anyone, your neighbor, and say, I have a question for you. Can I ask you this? And see if they could ask you the reverse question. Like, do you see something in me that you think I need to be fixed? I bet you that's a tough one. That be people
Yeah,
would be hard to ask, right?
right. It will be. I mean, who does that, right? Who wants to hear that? We have these superficial relationships where we don't want to be
Mm.
intimate with one another. We don't want to go that deep. We have to learn how in our community to have these intimate relationships without thinking they're weird. We have to have these relationships within our family that says, "Hey cousin, how are you? Haven't seen you in a long time." And then we turn our back and say they're a hot mess. No, we've got to be willing to say, "Hey, you know what? I think some of the choices that you making are detrimental to you and to your family. I'm saying this from a place of love. How can I
Mm.
help you?" Right? We've got to love each other that much.
If when you said something too about intimacy with yourself,
Mhm.
if we are unable to be intimate with ourselves, I don't see how we can have a healthy relationship with anything external.
You can't. You can't. It starts with you. You can't have a healthy relationship if you don't even know who you are. What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. What is that? What could it look like?
It looks
because
like a mess, right?
right, yeah, and in my family, because I used to always tell my kids that we've had examples, good or bad, in our family. Pregnancy early. You want to see how it looks out? Look at so and so, so and so. Doing things in the dirt. You want to go to jail? Look at so and so.
Yeah,
We have personal examples of what it's going to be if you choose this.
right.
So there's always a life encyclopedia. If you want to know how it turns out, I got something. Hold on, let me call somebody
Right,
because I
right.
know exactly who you're going to be
That
like right now.
right, exactly. We have those examples, right? But I think the key for us moving forward is to say, not even to go to those examples as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Start giving the proper information concerning attachments, emotional reactions, emotional intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
identifying what's toxic and what's not, identifying codependent relationships that can lead to addictions of any kind. So we have to start doing those things instead of setting the example. Because if we say, hey, if you don't want to go to jail, look at this person. If you want a better life, then look at her. We don't want to do that. We want to teach them how they can be successful without showing them the negative part of it, because they're going
That's
to
right.
see that
Right.
anyway. They see it already. So we want to show them something different. How do you do that? Well, as a young child, you give them different experiences, you
Mm-hmm.
expose them to different things, you remove them from the environment so they can see a different environment. Because a lot of what we go through is conditioning from childhood
Yeah.
on. So we're going to do what we know. And so expose them to something different, different environments, different cultures, different activities, different foods, different things to get them excited about life, but not sitting in a space where, okay, we know not to do that, we know not to do that, we know not to do all these things, but what do we do?
What do we do?
What are the tools to do, the healthy thing? What are the tools to success? What are the tools to be able to react in an emotionally intelligent way? What are the tools not to get caught up in substance abuse when my entire family is misusing substances? We have to provide those tools in our community, and we have to provide a space for that. If that's not happening within families, then we have to find a way to build that in our communities, externally, in our churches, in our community centers, at the
I agree
doctor's
with.
office.
Yeah. I the churches. I I just had a bishop on one of my shows, and I told him he's like one of the first clergymen I've ever had on my show, and I didn't understand why, because I've
Mm,
been very critical of what the churches stopped doing, not what they used to do, but what they stopped doing,
right.
and it's just maybe just somewhere along the '80s, it just kind of changed. They stopped becoming the pinnacle of the community. We had our schools, the Saturday schools, the community centers. A lot of that stopped. But I want to get back to addiction with you. Is addiction taught from a woman's perspective different than a man's perspective to the gender, or is it just received differently?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I think for women with addiction, we women tend to misuse or abuse substances in silence, because they have to be the pillar of the family a lot of times in our community. So if they're using or misusing substances, a lot of times it's in silence. It's not out there like men. Men in our community, it seems to be accepted more if you abuse and misuse substances. I don't think it's taught differently. I think it's just kind of like the culture of the family, right? So, who's setting the example for you when it comes to substances? Is that something, is it a daily lifestyle in your home, right? Is it a weekend thing? Who's the one that's consuming it the most? I don't believe that the message is relayed differently. I believe the modeling is different. And that's one of the gender things. That's the difference between men and women. We tend to do things different. So I think it's more of a modeling thing than how it's taught.
And that actually puts the black community in this crazy hole again, because we have all these labels anyway. We're not even talking about the ones we put on ourselves. We're just talking about the ones that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we have to teach it differently because our models are not the same as another model of different racial communities or ethnic communities. The Black community model is completely different, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have a Mideastern, type cultural band, right? We have this excessiveness because of sadness.
Yes.
Not We don't have excessiveness because of excessive happiness. We have excessiveness because of excessive trauma.
Yes.
So it's different.
Yes. Yes. It's a coping mechanism. It's
Yeah.
some way to find some type of satisfaction
And this,
in all of this chaos and all of this mess. We are constantly, as a people, looking for something to say we matter, right?
right, right.
We are somebody, we can be successful, but we want to feel good because when we step out of that door every day, we're confronted with so many different challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're always grinding to be better, to be accepted. And so we start finding ways to cope. And so what's the best way to cope is to have a family reunion with a ton of alcohol and get our party on.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
burn up as a family. And that was something, to be honest with you, going into addictions, what that was difficult for me because coming from that type of environment, our family barbecues, our family reunions were
Yeah,
fun, right?
yeah, right.
Everybody was having a good time. That was our happy place.
Until
And
the later part of the evening where we know who's going to fight who. And it just, there they go. I mean, the words, not what's going to happen, there they go.
yes,
That phrase is like, are you kidding me?
yes,
Someone come with you and you say, well, there they go. You mean this happens every time? And you're like, every time.
yes, yes, yes. But that comes from what
Yeah, the
some
conditioning.
the
Yeah,
conditioning,
yeah,
the drinking all day long,
yeah.
and then some of those things that we suppress as a people because family is family to us.
That's right.
Family is everything. Whether
Yeah,
we like you or not,
it's
we're
family.
family.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, instead of cultivating intimate relationships, we do this acceptance thing. We do
Mhm.
this codependency thing within our families without really getting to know one another. So at the end of the night, after we've been together all day, hey, here it comes. All the stuff that I've been suppressing about you all of these years.
It's coming out.
It's coming out. We've got to learn as a family unit in our community how to have the intimate relationships with one another, how to be honest and transparent and vulnerable with one another. And I think that it begins there because we can really prevent a lot of behaviors. We can prevent a lot of the mental health issues, a lot of the sicknesses and diagnosis. We go undiagnosed for so many years because we're
Yeah.
not having the conversation. Substance abuse, violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, all these things that are hidden behind the doors. If we start cultivating intimate relationships and having the conversation with one another and being vulnerable, that would really help our community to say, hey, I need to go get some counseling because I'm experiencing anxiety. Hey, I have an attachment to this bottle that is unhealthy. I need to go see about it, talking to an addictions counselor. We have to start having those conversations and have them young.
This, throughout this pandemic and wherever how we are in this phase, whatever phase, we have to be okay with not being okay or being uncomfortable. We
Yes.
have to be okay with saying, yeah, I was sexually abused. Yes, I had went through this. Yes, and because this is not about that being my thing I overcame. I
Yes.
don't want to hold that like a trophy, right?
Right.
But I'm okay with saying it.
Right. The reason that's important is, and the reason I bring up all those things, because a lot of those things, are contributed to why people start consuming substances, why
Yeah.
they are now addicted, chemically addicted to substance, because we don't talk about those things, and it's okay to talk about them. And a lot of times we have to understand when a person experiences that type of trauma,
Mhm.
they build up these walls of defense. They hold on to that trauma because now it's become a safe place. I've
Yeah.
been traumatized, right? Because if you release that trauma, then what do you do? How do you heal after that?
Again, then
So
who am I?
who am I? Because all of my life I've been traumatized. I've been holding on to this. I've been angry. I've been bitter. I've been hurt and wounded. How do I let go of that? And who am I? How do I define myself by something else?
Be- I want to say thank you for coming on and talking. I just think that these shows that I do, again, it's to help the community, all communities. And I hope people are listening
Yes.
because I know they're hurting.
Yes.
See, I already know that they're hurting. I already know what is going on internally. But if you don't say something, that healing process will never start.
It won't. And I just want to say sometimes it's difficult for that person to say something. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're around that person, you say something to them. Say, I know you're hurting. I can walk with you through this process.
Mm-hmm.
I can go to your first, session if you want me to. I can go to your first meeting. If you're around someone that you know is struggling, say something. Be a voice for the people that right now do not have a voice.
Mm-hmm. How can people reach you if they want to be like, hey,
Well, you can go to my Instagram account, Shannyn Stokes, or you can reach me at www.shannonstokes.com.
okay, okay. A lot of suicides have happened this
Yes,
year. It just seems like a lot of things have happened this year about a lot of things. We're going to be okay, aren't we?
we're going to be okay, but am I my brother's or my sister's keeper? Check on your neighbor, check on your family, check on your friends. We can't get through this alone.
No.
And people are suffering in silence. Don't let your friends or your family suffer in silence because they need you to grab their hand and to walk with them through this process.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Shannyn. I will be visiting with you again, and I'm so happy you were able to come on Me Bridges Live. Of course, anyone have any comments? If they put in any comments, make sure they get it right over to Shannyn. If you email me or whatever you want to talk with. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.